Welcome, everyone. Today, we're doing a real deep dive into the School Boys,
Mhm.
a street gang from Buffalo, New York. And we've pulled together some really interesting sources.
Yeah, news reports, government press releases, even stuff from the gangster report. It gives a pretty full picture.
Exactly. So we're going to look at, their origins, their activities, and it's not just drugs, actually.
Right.
Plus, their clashes with law enforcement and this kind of surprising move into music.
It's quite a story spanning over 2 decades.
So our mission, basically, is to pull out the key stuff, the most interesting bits about the Schuele Boys from all this material, and give you a clear picture of who they were.
Sounds good. Let's get into it.
Okay, so starting point. Where and when did these guys actually pop up?
Well, the sources point to the year 2000. That seems to be when the School Boys really formed.
Okay, 2000. And where in Buffalo?
On the east side. Specifically the Grider neighborhood, that was their main turf.
Right, and they got their name from Schuele Avenue.
Exactly, yeah. Schuele Avenue was sort of central for them. Their territory generally covered Grider and also pushed into the edges of the Genesee-Moselle area.
Gotcha. And the makeup of the gang, any specifics there?
The information indicates they were primarily an African-American group.
Okay, so established around 2000, East Side, Grider neighborhood. What were they actually doing? What were their main activities?
The big one was narcotics. That seems to be the primary income stream.
Right.
Trafficking cocaine, crack cocaine, marijuana, buying, selling, moving it around.
Okay, drugs. But you said it wasn't just drugs?
No, definitely not. They were also heavily involved in violence and what the reports call debt collecting.
Debt collecting, I imagine that's not sending polite letters.
No, not exactly.
Yeah.
The sources list things like robbery, extortion.
Right. Using threats or force.
Exactly. And even contract killings, arms trafficking, selling stolen goods. So, yeah, violence was a big part of their operation, not just a side effect.
So it sounds like a pretty diversified criminal enterprise, in a way.
You could say that. Drugs were key, but violence was definitely a tool, maybe even another revenue stream.
And the drug side of things, was it just selling on the street or more involved?
It seems more involved. The reports mention them buying narcotics, often cocaine, from other dealers or suppliers.
Oh.
Then they'd repackage it themselves for their own network to sell.
Right, so controlling their own distribution to some extent.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
And the sources also mention drive-by shootings pretty explicitly. That points to, the level of violence tied to their drug business and probably turf wars.
Yeah, definitely dangerous. Something that caught my eye was this detail about law enforcement investigations sometimes needing to be, sped up because of threats.
Ah, yeah, that's a really telling detail. Multiple times, investigations involving the FBI, the New York State Police, Erie County Sheriff.
Some major agencies.
You're right.
Yeah.
And they were using wiretaps, surveillance, undercover buys, the whole toolkit. But they had to accelerate things because they'd pick up credible intelligence about imminent plans for violence, like specific threats against rival gang members.
Wow. So the investigations themselves uncovered plots that were about to happen.
Exactly. It shows just how volatile things were, the constant threat of violence between these groups.
Speaking of rivals, who were they mainly up against?
The main rival group mentioned is the East Ferry Street Gang. That seems to have been a major conflict.
Okay. East Ferry Street Gang. Did they have any alliances? Anyone they worked with?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. That piece from the gangster report specifically mentions an alliance between the School Boys and the Buffalo crime family.
Whoa, really? The mafia?
That's what the report suggests. An alliance with, established organized crime.
Huh. Did the sources say much about what that looked like what the connection was for?
Not in huge detail, unfortunately.
Right.
But, just the mention is significant. You could speculate it might give them access to, I don't know, better drug supplies, maybe some protection, maybe more structured network for their activities.
Right, connects them to a different level of the underworld, potentially.
Potentially, yeah. It suggests they weren't just operating in a vacuum.
Definitely adds a layer. Now, within the gang itself, were there any individuals who kind of stood out in the reports? Any key figures named?
Yes. One name comes up consistently. Ricardo McCrae,
Ricardo McCrae.
also known as Murder Matt.
Murder Matt. Okay, that's quite a nickname.
It is, and he's specifically flagged as a notable, maybe even a leading member. Tells you something about his reputation, I guess.
No kidding. Okay, shifting gears a bit, because this part surprised me reading through the sources, their involvement in music.
Yeah, it's a fascinating angle, isn't it? Several members were apparently active in making rap music. some of it described as drill music.
So, like, as a side thing, or was it connected?
It seems very connected.
Yeah.
They even had their own record label, apparently called Gone Entertainment.
Gone Entertainment, okay.
Yeah. And the music wasn't just, generic rap. The lyrics reportedly showcased their gang activities.
Seriously, like bragging about crimes.
References to illegal drug production, things like that.
Yeah.
It was basically putting their lifestyle out there.
Ah.
And their music videos, too. They'd apparently filmed them in areas they considered schoolboys territory, like south of the Erie County Medical Center.
So marking territory through music videos.
Seems like it. But here's the really crucial part.
Okay.
Specific song titles, Front Door and Dinner Table, were actually used by prosecutors as evidence against some members.
Get out! They use their own song titles in court.
That's what the sources state. The lyrics or context presumably tied them to criminal acts discussed in the case. It's a wild intersection of, creative expression and criminal evidence.
That is wild. It really highlights how digital footprints, even music, can become part of a prosecution now.
Absolutely. It's not just fingerprints and ballistics anymore.
Definitely something to think about. But, the violence wasn't just by the schoolboys, right? They were targets, too.
Oh, absolutely. That 2010 mass shooting outside the City Grill downtown, that was horrific.
I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, a really terrible event. And according to the U.S. attorney at the time, William Hochul Jr., members of the schoolboys were the intended targets.
So they were specifically targeted in that attack.
That was the official word, yes.
Yeah.
4 people died right then or very soon after. And tragically, a 5th victim died from their injuries years later.
Just awful. A brutal reminder of the stakes in that life.
Definitely shows the cycle of violence they were caught up in, both giving and receiving.
So with all this activity and violence, what was the eventual law enforcement response? Was there a major crackdown?
Yes, there was.
Yeah.
In 2017, a significant operation went down.
Okay.
They arrested 28 people identified as schoolboys members or associates.
28? That's a big sweep.
It was. The charges covered narcotics distribution and also connections to homicides in Buffalo.
So hitting them on multiple fronts.
Exactly. And there's a specific detail from one of the arrests that kind of highlights the scale. The Buffalo PD found $19,000 in cash.
Wow.
And 300 grams of cocaine at one member's place during that operation.
19 grand cash and a significant amount of coke. Yeah, that paints a picture.
Right. Not small-time stuff.
Okay, so as we kind of wrap up this deep dive then, what are the main things we should take away about the Schuele Boys?
Well, I think we've seen they emerged around 2000 in Buffalo, carved out territory on the east side.
Right.
Their main business was crime, narcotics, trafficking being central, but also serious violence, debt collection, maybe even contract killing.
And that potential link to the Buffalo crime family.
Yeah, that alliance mentioned in the Gangster Report, plus their clear rivalry with the East Ferry Street gang.
Don't forget the music.
Definitely not. The whole Gone Entertainment angle, using music to document their life, and then having song titles used against them in court. That's memorable.
For sure.
And, of course, being both perpetrators and targets of extreme violence like that City Grill shooting, followed by that big law enforcement takedown in 2017.
It really shows how a group like this can be involved in so many different things over, almost 2 decades.
Exactly. It's a complex picture of a street gang's activity and impact within a city.
So maybe a final thought for our listeners to chew on.
Yeah, I think it's worth considering how all these pieces fit together.
Yeah.
The street-level drug stuff, the potential links to organized crime, the cultural aspect with the music, and how that music then becomes evidence. It really illustrates the complicated nature of gang activity, doesn't it? And how it intersects with culture, community safety, and the challenges facing law enforcement. Something to think about in this Buffalo case, and maybe more broadly, too.